Doris Miller, the cook who became Pearl Harbor's hero, December 7th, 1941, 7:55 in the morning, USS West Virginia, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Close your eyes and imagine this: the smell of coffee brewing in the officers' mess, the sharp tang of oil and metal, the sweet, salt-heavy air of a Hawaiian morning. Doris Miller, a 22-year-old black man from Waco, Texas, is moving through the ship's corridors, his arms loaded with white officers' laundry, sheets, uniforms, the clothes of men who can give him orders, but whom he can never equal, not in rank, not in the eyes of the United States Navy. Because in 1941, that's what black men do in the Navy. They cook, they clean, they shine shoes, they collect laundry, they do not fight, they cannot fight. The Navy has determined, officially and scientifically, that they lack the intelligence, the discipline, the courage. Doris Miller is walking proof of that doctrine, a mess attendant, third class. His battle station, if shooting ever starts, is deep, in the ammunition hold, passing shells to white sailors who will do the real fighting. Then the world explodes. A Japanese torpedo, 450 pounds of high explosive, slams into West Virginia's port side with a sound like God tearing steel. The ship convulses. Another torpedo hits. Then another. Men are screaming. The deck is tilting beneath Miller's feet. Oil is spreading across the water, catching fire. The morning air is filled with the shriek of diving planes and the thunder of bombs detonating. And Doris Miller, the man the United States Navy said wasn't good enough to touch a weapon, is about to do something impossible. He's about to save lives while America burns around him. He's about to man a gun he was never trained to use. He's about to become a hero in a country that wouldn't let him drink from the same water fountain as the men whose laundry he was carrying. This is the story they didn't teach you in school. This is the story that America tried to bury, then tried to forget, then took 8 decades to honor properly. This is the story of the cook who shattered every lie they told about what a black man could do. Before we go any further, I need you to do something for me. Right now, pause for just a second and drop a comment telling me what country you're listening from. Are you in the United States, hearing this story about your own hidden history? Are you in the UK, Canada, Australia? Maybe you're listening from Nigeria, South Africa, Jamaica, Brazil, places where the descendants of the African diaspora are still fighting for recognition and respect. Maybe you're in Japan, Germany, France, Russia, places with your own complicated relationships with World War II history. Wherever you are, I want to know. Because this story is universal. It's about being told you're not good enough and proving them wrong anyway. It's about fighting for people who won't fight for you. It's about heroism in the face of not just the enemy, but the system itself. So drop that comment. Tell me where you are. And while you're down there, hit that like button. I know everyone asks for likes. But here's why this one matters. Every like tells the algorithm that this story deserves to be heard. That the history they left out of the textbooks deserves the same attention as the history they put in. Every like is a vote for truth over comfortable lies. And subscribe to this channel. Click that bell. Because if they hid Doris Miller's story, what else did they hide? How many other heroes are buried in footnotes and fine print? How many other moments of courage were deemed too complicated, too uncomfortable, too challenging to the narrative? I'm going to tell you those stories, everyone I can find. But right now, let's talk about Doris Miller. Let's talk about Pearl Harbor And let's talk about the lie that almost erased one of the greatest acts of courage in American military history. Are you ready? Let's go back to Waco, Texas. Let's meet the man before the moment. Waco, Texas, the making of a hero they wouldn't acknowledge. October 12, 1919. Doris Miller enters the world in Waco, Texas, the fourth son of Connery and Henrietta Miller. His mother wanted a girl. She'd already had 3 boys, so she named him Doris. The name stuck, though everyone would call him Dory for the rest of his too short life. Picture Waco in 1919. This is the South, Jim Crow South, segregated South. The kind of place where a black boy learns early what lines he can't cross, what water fountains he can't drink from, what futures he can't dream about. The Millers were sharecroppers initially. Then Connery found work as a laborer, while Henrietta worked as a domestic servant, cleaning white people's houses. The Miller boys, there would eventually be 5 of them, knew hard work like they knew their own names. Cotton fields, sun beating down, hands bleeding. The kind of labor that builds muscle and kills dreams in equal measure. But Dory was different. Dory was big. By high school he was 5'9" and 200 pounds of pure muscle. He was fast, too. Fast enough to be the fullback on the Moore High School football team. People who knew him said he could move, quick on his feet, powerful when he hit. He had something. Potential. That dangerous, beautiful thing that makes you hope for more than what the world says you're allowed to have. But this was Texas. This was 1939. A black boy from Waco had options, and they all looked the same, sharecropping like his father, manual labor, service work. The ceiling was low and made of concrete. So when Dory Miller was 19 years old, he made a choice. He joined the Navy, September 16, 1939. Doris Miller enlisted in Dallas, Texas. Europe was already at war. Hitler had invaded Poland 2 weeks earlier. America wasn't in it yet, but you could feel it coming. The military was expanding. They needed men. The Navy recruiter probably smiled when Dory walked in. Big kid, strong. Exactly what they needed. What they needed for the Messman branch, anyway. The policy, official, documented segregation. Now, let me be very clear about something, because this isn't speculation or exaggeration. This is a documented historical fact. The United States Navy in 1939 operated under General Order 99, which had been in effect since 1893. This order, along with subsequent policies and the determinations of the Navy's General Board, restricted black sailors to the Messman branch, not because of training issues, not because of logistics, because the Navy had officially determined that black men were racially inferior. Let me read you what they actually believed based on studies and policy documents from that era. They believed black sailors lacked the intellectual capacity for complex technical training. They believed black sailors lacked the emotional discipline necessary for combat. They believed black sailors would panic under fire. They believed black sailors couldn't be trusted with weapons or responsibility. This wasn't one racist admiral's opinion. This was official Navy doctrine backed by what they considered scientific studies, racial psychology, and the wisdom of military tradition. So when Doris Miller signed his enlistment papers, he wasn't signing up to be a sailor in the full sense. He was signing up to be a servant, a cook, a cleaner, a man who would serve food to white officers and collect their laundry and shine their shoes and live in separate quarters and use separate facilities and never, ever advance beyond the station assigned to him by the color of his skin. Imagine that. Imagine being 19 years old, strong, capable, willing to serve your country, and being told you can serve, but only on your knees. Miller reported to recruit training at Naval Training Station Norfolk, Virginia. Even here, segregation was total. Black recruits trained separately. They learned the same basic seamanship, the same rope knots, the same military bearing. But they learned it knowing that their ceiling was another man's floor. After boot camp, Miller was assigned to the USS Pyro, an ammunition ship. He served as a mess attendant in third class. He set tables, he served food, he cleaned. For months, this was his life. Then, in January 1940, he transferred to the USS West Virginia. West Virginia was beautiful, a Colorado-class battleship commissioned in 1923. She displaced 32,600 tons. She was 624 feet long. She mounted 8 16-inch guns in 4 turrets, the kind of weapons that could hurl a shell weighing as much as a small car over 20 miles. She had armor plating feet thick. She was a symbol of American naval power. And Doris Miller's job was to make sure the officers' coffee was hot. The West Virginia's crew numbered over 1,500 men. Of these, approximately 100 were black, all restricted to the Messman branch. They had their own berthing area, their own mess. They existed in parallel to the white crew, close enough to serve them, far enough away, not to threaten the racial order. By all accounts, Miller was good at his job, reliable, professional, strong enough that when heavy lifting was needed, people called for Dory. He became the ship's heavyweight boxing champion in an informal competition. He worked out constantly, staying in fighting shape, even though the Navy had made clear he would never fight. He made friends. Samuel Gilliam, another messman, Freddie Williams, men who understood the quiet indignity of their position, men who put on their uniforms every day and served a Navy that didn't value them as sailors, only as servants. And here's the thing that should break your heart. Miller was proud to serve. He sent money home to his family. He was seeing the world, Hawaii, the Philippines, places a kid from Waco would never otherwise see. He was making something of himself within the narrow confines he'd been given. He was doing everything right in a system designed to keep him down. The beautiful, terrible irony. By December 1941, Miller had been in the Navy for 25 months, 2 years and a month. In that time, here's what he'd learned: how to set a proper table for officers' mess, how to prepare Navy coffee exactly to specification, how to collect, wash, press, and return officers' laundry, how to clean berthing areas, swab decks, polish brass, how to move efficiently through a ship without getting in the way of real sailors doing real Navy work. Here's what he had never learned: how to fire a .50 caliber Browning M2 anti-aircraft machine gun, how to lead a target moving at 200 miles per hour, how to clear a jam in a belt-fed weapon, how to control recoil and maintain accuracy under fire, how to track multiple aircraft simultaneously, any of it, none of it, because that wasn't for him. Meanwhile, the West Virginia sat in Pearl Harbor as part of the Pacific Fleet, America's steel fist, ready to punch back if Japan got too aggressive. The battleship represented everything the Navy valued: power, discipline, technological superiority, fighting spirit. And one of the men keeping that battleship operational was forbidden from embodying any of those values himself. Think about that contradiction. Really think about it. The United States was parking its most powerful weapons in Hawaii as a show of strength. We're ready to defend democracy. We're ready to fight tyranny. We're ready to protect freedom. But Doris Miller? He couldn't be trusted with a gun. That's not irony. That's obscenity. I need you to understand how deep this went. This wasn't just Southern prejudice transplanted onto ships. This was institutional racism backed by what the Navy considered rigorous scientific analysis. In the 1920s and 1930s, the Navy conducted studies. They brought in psychologists. They administered tests. They measured reaction times and cognitive abilities and stress responses. And they concluded, officially concluded, that black men were unsuitable for combat roles. The arguments varied depending on who was making them. Some said black sailors lacked intelligence. Their brains, these experts claimed, simply couldn't process the complex information required for modern warfare. Operating a gun sight? Too complicated? Understanding fire control? Beyond their capacity? These men had medical degrees, psychology credentials. They published their findings. Others focused on emotional control. Black men, they argued, were too emotional, too excitable. They would panic under fire. They couldn't maintain discipline in combat conditions. They'd break and run. Still others claimed it was about leadership. White sailors, they said, wouldn't follow black officers. Unit cohesion would collapse. The Navy would be less effective. Segregation wasn't about racism. It was about military effectiveness. Every argument was garbage. Every study was corrupted by the racism of the researchers. Every conclusion was predetermined. But it was official. It was policy. It was the law of the sea. What they said, he couldn't do. So let's be specific about what the Navy's position meant for Doris Miller. He could not be trained on any weapon system, not anti-aircraft guns, not the main battery, not even a rifle for shore duty. Weapons were for combat ratings, and combat ratings were for white sailors. He could not advance beyond mess attendant first class. That was the ceiling. You could serve 20 years and retire at the same rank you started. No path to chief petty officer, certainly no path to officer rank. He could not cross-train into any technical rating. Want to be a machinist's mate? No. Gunner's mate? No. Radio man? Navigator? Fire control technician? No, no, no. You're a cook. You'll die a cook. His battle station, his assigned position if the ship went to general quarters, was in the ammunition hold, 3 decks below the main deck. If combat started, Miller's job was to pass ammunition up through a human chain to the guns he'd never been trained to. Fire. He would be in the dark, below the waterline, doing manual labor while other men fought. That was the plan. That was what the system said Doris Miller was capable of. On the morning of December 7, 1941, the Navy was about to learn how spectacularly wrong they were. Life aboard West Virginia. Let me paint you a picture of what Miller's daily life actually looked like, because you need to understand the grinding nature of this existence. At 05:30, wake up. The black mess attendants rise before most of the crew. They have work to do before the ship fully wakes up. At 0600, begin breakfast preparation. The officers expect their meal at specific times, prepared to specific standards. Coffee must be precisely the right temperature, eggs cooked exactly right, tables set with military precision, white tablecloths, proper place settings. Everything is just so. 700 to 0800, serve officers breakfast. You stand at attention. You refill coffee before it's asked for. You're invisible until you're needed, then immediately present. You say, yes, sir, and no, sir, and nothing else unless directly asked. 0800 1000, clean up from breakfast, wash dishes, scrub pots, clean the officer's mess until it gleams. The Navy is particular about cleanliness. Everything must shine. 1,000, 1,200, prepare for lunch. The cycle begins again. 1,200, 1,400, serve lunch. More standing at attention, more invisible servitude. 1,400, 1,600, clean up. Then collect officers' laundry. Wash it, press it, return it. Shine their shoes if needed. Clean their berthing areas. 1,600, 1,800, prepare for dinner. 1,800, 2,000, serve dinner. The evening meal is the longest, the most formal. 2,000, 2,200, final cleanup. Make sure everything is ready for the next day. Day after day after day, weeks into months into years. Serving men who might be kind or might be cruel, but who all operated in a system that said, you weren't quite fully human. And here's the thing, Miller did it all without complaint. By every account, he was professional, good at his job, respected by the other mess attendants, even liked by some of the officers. In that paternalistic way, men sometimes like their servants. But in his off hours? That's when you saw who Dory Miller really was. He boxed, he worked out, he stayed in fighting shape, he had a boxer's build, compact, powerful, quick. He became the ship's unofficial heavyweight champion in informal matches. Other sailors knew, you don't mess with Dory. He's strong, he's fast, he can handle himself. Why did he do this? Why stay in fighting condition when you're never going to fight? Pride, maybe. Or maybe some part of him knew that the system was wrong, that he was capable of more, that if the moment ever came, he'd be ready. The moment was coming. Saturday, December 6, 1941. A normal night in Pearl Harbor. The West Virginia is moored at Battleship Row, Ford Island. She's tied up alongside the USS Tennessee. This is prime real estate in the harbor. The battleships lined up, like steel monuments to American power. Most of the crew has liberty. They're in Honolulu, drinking, dancing, and enjoying the weekend. Some are at the beach, some are at the movies. It's peacetime Hawaii, paradise. The men who stay aboard have a quiet evening. Card games, letter writing, the usual routines of sailors with time on their hands. Dory Miller probably worked out. Maybe I wrote a letter home to Waco. Maybe talked with his friends about normal things. Girls, sports, plans for the future. Nobody was thinking about war. Sure, tensions with Japan were high. Diplomats were talking. There were concerns. But war? Real war? Here? In Hawaii? That was unthinkable. 220 miles north of Oahu, the Japanese First Air Fleet was preparing to launch. 6 aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, Zuikaku, carrying 414 aircraft, pilots who had been training for this exact mission for months, torpedo bombers, dive bombers, fighters, all with one target, Pearl Harbor. The strike order had been given, the timing confirmed. First wave, 7:55 hours, Sunday, December 7th. In his bunk aboard the West Virginia, Doris Miller went to sleep thinking about breakfast service in the morning, about white tablecloths and coffee temperatures, and the never-ending cycle of cooking and cleaning and serving. He went to sleep as a mess attendant. He would wake up as a warrior. Sunday morning, December 7th. The air is perfect, that Hawaiian morning air that tourists pay thousands of dollars to breathe, warm but not hot, salty, clean, the kind of morning where you can see the mountains in perfect detail. Most of the crew is still in bunks. It's Sunday, a day of rest, no drills scheduled. The ship is quiet. Dory Miller is probably in the crew's mess area, getting ready for breakfast service. Or maybe he's collecting laundry. Sources vary on his exact location when it starts, but we know he's below decks, doing his job, thinking about the routine ahead. Then, the universe detonates. The first bomb hits USS Arizona, moored 500 feet away. The sound, there's no way to describe it if you haven't heard a battleship explode. It's not loud. Loud is too small a word. It's a physical force. It hits you in the chest. It compresses the air. It makes your ears ring and your vision blur. Then the torpedoes start hitting West Virginia. Japanese Nakajima B-5N Kate torpedo bombers, flying perfect attack runs at less than 100 feet altitude, are putting Type 91 Modification 2 aerial torpedoes into the West Virginia's port side. Each torpedo is 17.7 feet long, weighs 1,041 pounds, and carries a 450-pound high-explosive warhead. The first one hits at 0755, just forward of the mainmast. The second hits at 0756. 5 more follow in the next 3 minutes. Each impact is catastrophic. The torpedoes aren't just punching holes, they're tearing the ship apart. Water is flooding in at thousands of gallons per second. Bulkheads are buckling. Men are being thrown across. Compartments. The ship is listing to port, tilting toward the harbor bottom. Doris Miller feels the impacts. The whole ship shudders. The lights flicker and die. Emergency lighting kicks in, casting everything in a red hellscape glow. The general quarters alarm is blaring. All hands, man your battle stations. This is not a drill. Miller runs. He's trying to get to his assigned station, the ammunition hold. That's where he's supposed to be. That's his job. But the ship is chaos. Men are running in every direction. Some are screaming. Some are silent with shock. The smell of oil and explosive and burning metal fills the air. He makes it topside, probably through sheer strength and determination. The scene that greets him is apocalyptic. Look around with Miller's eyes for a moment. To the starboard, the USS Tennessee is right next to them, so close you could jump from one ship to the other. She's being hit too. Bombs are falling. One meant for the West Virginia misses and hits Tennessee instead. Shrapnel is flying everywhere. Ahead and behind, the other battleships of the Pacific Fleet are dying. The USS Oklahoma is capsizing, actually rolling over. You can see men sliding off her hull into the oil-slick water. She'll go completely upside down in less than 12 minutes, trapping 429 men inside. The USS Arizona is on fire. The whole forward part of the ship is flames and smoke. The explosion when her magazine went up was so massive, it created a mushroom cloud. 1,177 men died in Arizona, most of them in the first 9 minutes. The USS California is sinking. The USS Nevada is trying to make a run for the harbor entrance and is being bombed to pieces. The USS Maryland is being hit. The USS Pennsylvania is in dry dock, but taking damage. The sky is full of aircraft. The red circles of the rising sun on their wings. They're diving, dropping bombs, pulling up, circling back. The noise is constant. Engines screaming, bombs whistling, explosions, thunder clapping. Across the harbor, anti-aircraft fire is starting to fill the air with black puffs, but it's not enough. Not nearly enough. Oil from ruptured fuel tanks is spreading across the harbor and catching fire. Men are jumping from ships into water that's burning. The screaming is constant, men calling for help, for corpsmen, for their mothers. This is hell. This is the end of the world. And Doris Miller is standing in the middle of it, trying to figure out what to do. An officer, sources suggest it might have been Lieutenant Commander Dwar C. Johnson or Ensign Victor Delano, both would survive to testify later, grabs Miller and gives him an order. Help me get the captain to safety." Captain Mervyn S. Bennion is on the navigation bridge. He's 53 years old. He's been in the Navy since 1910. He's a good captain, respected by his crew, and he's been hit by shrapnel, flying metal from a bomb that struck Tennessee instead of West Virginia. The shrapnel has torn open his abdomen. His wounds are catastrophic. He's dying, and everyone knows it, including Bennion himself. Miller makes his way to the bridge. The ship is tilting more severely now, maybe 15 degrees to port. Walking is difficult. The deck is slippery with oil and blood. Smoke is everywhere, stinging eyes, making it hard to breathe. He finds Captain Bennion with Johnson and Delano. The captain is still conscious, still trying to command his ship, still calling out orders even though he's bleeding out. That's leadership. That's what the Navy is supposed to be about. Duty until the end. Miller and the others try to move Bennion to a safer location. The navigation bridge is exposed, vulnerable. They need to get him below decks, to the aid station, but moving him causes agony. The captain gasps. His face goes white. They get him to a sheltered spot on the bridge. They try to stop the bleeding. They can't. The wounds are too severe. Bennion knows it, but he keeps giving orders. Get the men off the ship. Fight the fires. Return fire. Damage control. Even dying, he's thinking about his ship and his crew. Doris Miller stays with him. This is important. Miller stays with his dying captain while bombs are falling and the ship is sinking. He doesn't run. He doesn't panic. He does what needs to be done. Captain Bennion dies on that bridge at approximately 0808 hours, about 13 minutes after the attack started. His last concerns were for his ship. Miller has just watched his commanding officer die. He's covered in the man's blood. The ship is sinking. Aircraft are still attacking. Men are dying all around him. What does he do? He finds a gun. The guns. Here's the moment. This is it. This is where everything the Navy believed gets shattered. Lieutenant Commander Johnson, who would later testify to what he saw, looks at this young black mess attendant covered in the captain's blood and says something like, "Can you handle one of those guns?" Or maybe, "We need someone on those guns." The exact words are lost to history and chaos. But the meaning is clear. There are two 50 caliber Browning M2 anti-aircraft machine guns on the bridge level. They're unmanned. The sailors assigned to them are dead, wounded, or fighting fires. The guns are silent at a moment when every gun needs to be firing. Johnson is asking if Doris Miller, who has never been trained on these weapons, who has never fired a gun in the Navy, who isn't supposed to even touch this equipment, can step in. Miller says yes. Think about what's happening in his head in this moment. The ship is sinking. He could die in the next 30 seconds. He has every reason to get off the bridge, to seek safety, to save himself. The Navy never trained him for this. The Navy explicitly told him he wasn't capable of this. He could say no. He could say he doesn't know how. He could abandon his post. Instead, he climbs behind that gun, the weapon. The Browning M2 50 caliber machine gun is a monster. Let me give you the specifications so you understand what Miller is dealing with. Weight, 84 pounds for the gun alone, more with the mount. Rate of fire, 450-600 rounds per minute, depending on configuration. Muzzle velocity, 2,910 feet per second. Effective range, over a mile, but you're trying to hit aircraft moving at 200+ miles per hour. Operation, recoil-operated, air-cooled, belt-fed. If you've never fired one, the recoil will surprise you. It's substantial. You need a solid stance and strong arms to control it. The noise is deafening, louder than any sound you've heard outside of combat. The muzzle flash is blinding, and it's complex. You need to load the belt correctly or it jams. Charge the weapon properly. Understand the trigger. It's got a specific feel. Lead your target. You're not shooting at where the plane is, you're shooting at where it's going to be. Control your bursts. Continuous fire will overheat the barrel and cause malfunctions. Clear jams quickly when they happen, and they will happen. Track multiple targets and prioritize threats. Doris Miller has never done any of this. The closest he's come is watching other sailors train during drills. That's it. Observation. No hands-on experience. No live fire training. No instruction. But he's watched carefully. And he's about to prove that capability doesn't require permission. Firing Miller opens fire. The gun roars to life. The whole mount shakes with the recoil. Spent brass casings, each one over 4 inches long, are ejected in a continuous stream, piling up around his feet. The belt feeds through. The gun bucks and jumps in his hands. And he holds it, controls it, puts rounds on target. Witnesses, and there were multiple witnesses who survived to testify, would later say Miller operated that gun like he'd been trained on it, like he knew what he was doing. They saw him tracking aircraft. They saw him maintaining fire discipline, short, controlled bursts instead of wasting ammunition on panicked spraying. They saw him shifting from target to target as Japanese planes screamed overhead. Lieutenant Commander Johnson would later state, Miller served valiantly and with great courage. Ensign Victor Delano would confirm it. Other sailors on the bridge or nearby positions saw it. Doris Miller, forbidden from training on weapons, was fighting like a trained gunner. How long did he fire? Sources vary. Some say 15 minutes, some say longer. But he kept that gun in action until the ammunition ran out. He fired through the first wave of the attack. He might have still been firing during the second wave, which came about 45 minutes after the first. Did he shoot down any planes? This is where the record gets complicated. In the chaos of Pearl Harbor, with hundreds of anti-aircraft guns firing simultaneously, attribution of kills is nearly impossible. The Navy couldn't confirm any aerial victories for Miller, but multiple witnesses said they saw Japanese planes in his field of fire take hits, saw them smoke, saw them veer off. Whether he personally downed an aircraft or just damaged them enough to disrupt their attacks, we'll never know for certain. What we know for absolute certain is this. Doris Miller manned that gun with competence and courage under the worst possible conditions. He did exactly what the Navy said black men couldn't do, and he did it without training. After the guns. When the ammunition is exhausted, Miller doesn't stop fighting. The attack is ongoing. The ship is still sinking. She's listing 28 degrees now, threatening to capsize like the Oklahoma did. Miller helps fight fires. He helps evacuate wounded sailors. He moves through smoke and chaos, using his strength to do whatever needs doing, carrying injured men, moving debris, fighting the flames that are consuming his ship. Remember, he's a boxer. He's strong. He's calm under pressure. While other men are in shock, paralyzed by the horror, Miller is working. Finally, the order comes. Abandon ship. The West Virginia is lost. She's settled into the mud of Pearl Harbor, her decks awash, her superstructure a twisted wreck. 106 of her crew are dead. Many more are wounded. The ship is finished, at least for now. Miller goes over the side with the other survivors, into water, fouled with oil and debris and blood, swimming to shore or to rescue boats, covered in the captain's blood, in oil, in the residue of combat. He's been fighting for hours. The Navy said he couldn't. He did anyway. The aftermath. Counting the cost. Let me give you the numbers from Pearl Harbor because you need to understand the scale of what happened. 403 Americans killed, 178 wounded, 21 ships sunk or damaged, including all 8 battleships in the harbor, 188 aircraft destroyed, mostly caught on the ground. The Pacific Fleet was devastated. America's naval power in the Pacific was crippled in a single morning. The nation was in shock. How could this happen? How could Japan strike us like this? The anger was immediate, total, and looking for an outlet. President Roosevelt would call December 7th a date which will live in infamy. Congress would declare war the next day. America was going to war, and America needed heroes, needed stories of courage, needed proof that we could fight back, that we hadn't just rolled over and died. The Navy started identifying acts of heroism. There were plenty. Sailors who stayed at their posts while their ships sank, pilots who got planes in the air against overwhelming odds, men who pulled wounded shipmates from burning water, acts of courage all across the harbor. But the story of Doris Miller? That story got complicated. The unnamed hero. In the initial press reports about Pearl Harbor, there are references to a Negro messman who manned a machine gun and fired on attacking aircraft. No name, no details, just an acknowledgement that yes, this uncomfortable thing happened. A black man did something heroic, with a weapon, in combat, against the explicit policy and doctrine of the Navy. What do you do with that? The Navy wasn't sure, so they said nothing. The messman went unnamed in official reports. The story circulated as rumor, as anecdote. Some newspapers picked it up. But without a name, without official confirmation, it remained vague. Meanwhile, the black press smelled a story. The Pittsburgh Courier, the Chicago Defender, the Baltimore Afro-American, newspapers that served black communities and actually reported on black achievement. They started digging. They wanted a name. They wanted details. They wanted to know who this hero was and why the Navy wasn't honoring him properly. The NAACP got involved. They pressured the Navy for information. They wrote letters. They made phone calls. They pushed. For 3 months, the Navy said nothing. 3 months. While they were lionizing white heroes from Pearl Harbor, naming them, promoting them, putting their faces in recruitment posters, the black cook who manned a gun stayed anonymous. Finally, a name. March 1942, 3 months after Pearl Harbor. Under pressure from the black press, from civil rights organizations, from people who refused to let this story die, the Navy finally released his name. Doris Miller, Messman 2nd Class, USS West Virginia. The black community erupted in pride. Here was proof, living proof. A black man had done everything white men could do, had done it without training, had done it under fire. Every newspaper serving black readers put Miller on the front page. He became instantly famous in black America. The mainstream white press was quieter. Some papers covered it, many didn't. It didn't fit the narrative. It raised uncomfortable questions. But the Navy couldn't ignore him anymore. Miller became useful. They needed black enlistment. The war was expanding, and they needed manpower. Miller's face started appearing on recruitment posters, above and beyond the call of duty, encouraging black men to enlist. The irony was perfect and terrible. They were using Miller's image to recruit black men into the same segregated service that had restricted Miller himself. The medal. Too little, not enough. May 27, 1942, Pearl Harbor, the USS Enterprise, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, presents Doris Miller with the Navy Cross. It's a ceremony. Press is present. It's a big deal. The Navy Cross is the third highest decoration in the United States military. Only the Medal of Honor and the Distinguished Service Cross, in different contexts, outrank it. It's given for extraordinary heroism in combat. Miller earned it, no question. The citation reads, "For distinguished devotion to duty, extraordinary courage, and disregard for his own personal safety during the attack on the fleet in Pearl Harbor, territory of Hawaii, by Japanese forces on December 7, 1941. While at the side of his captain on the bridge, Miller, despite enemy strafing and bombing, and in the face of a serious fire, assisted in moving his captain, who had been mortally wounded, to a place of greater safety, and later manned and operated a machine gun directed at enemy Japanese attacking aircraft until ordered to leave the bridge." It's a good citation. It accurately describes what he did. But let's talk about what it doesn't say. It doesn't specifically mention that he'd never been trained on that weapon. It doesn't mention that he was restricted from weapons training by official Navy policy. It doesn't mention the systemic racism that made his actions not just heroic, but revolutionary. And it doesn't explain why he didn't get the Medal of Honor, the medal he should have received. Look at Medal of Honor citations from Pearl Harbor. Let me give you a few examples. Machinist Donald K. Ross, USS Nevada, stayed below decks fighting fires and flooding despite heat exhaustion and burns. Repeatedly went back into danger. Medal of Honor, Lieutenant Commander Samuel G. Fuqua, USS Arizona, organized firefighting and rescue operations. While his ship was exploding around him, maintained order and discipline. Medal of Honor. Captain Franklin Van Valkenburg, USS Arizona, remained at his post on the bridge until killed by the explosion that destroyed his ship. Medal of Honor. Posthumous. These are all heroic actions, absolutely worthy of recognition. I'm not diminishing any of them. But Doris Miller's actions, manning a weapon he'd never trained on, firing effectively against attacking aircraft, doing so only after helping his mortally wounded captain, then continuing to fight fires and rescue men until ordered to abandon ship. Those actions meet every criterion for the Medal of Honor. Extraordinary heroism. Check. Risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. Check. Actions that had a direct impact on the battle. Check. Witnessed by multiple sources. Check. So why the Navy Cross instead of the Medal of Honor? You know why. Because giving a black mess attendant the nation's highest military honor would require the Navy to admit that their entire racial policy was wrong, that black men were capable of everything white men were, that segregation wasn't about capability, it was about racism. The Navy Cross let them honor Miller without confronting the system. They could give him a medal, use his image for recruitment, and never address the fundamental injustice. Back to the mess deck. And here's the betrayal within the betrayal, the part that should make you absolutely furious. After receiving the Navy Cross, after becoming one of the most famous black Americans in the country, after proving beyond any doubt that he was capable of combat duties, Doris Miller went back to being a cook. The Navy didn't commission him as an officer. They didn't send him to gunnery school. They didn't transfer him to a combat rating. They promoted him to mess attendant first class, still within the messman branch. He got a medal and a handshake from an admiral. Then he went back to serving white officers their meals. Think about that. The man who had proven the Navy's racial doctrine was pseudoscientific garbage went back to collecting laundry. The war bond tour Miller did get sent on a war bond tour. He traveled around the United States, appearing at rallies, encouraging people to buy bonds to support the war effort. He was particularly popular in black communities, where he was treated like the hero he was. Imagine being Doris Miller during this time. You're famous. People recognize you. Black Americans see you as proof of their worth. White Americans applaud politely and go back to their segregated lives. You wear your uniform with the Navy cross ribbon. You smile for cameras. You give short speeches. And you know that when the tour is over, you're going back to being a cook. The Navy was using him, using his image, using his heroism, using his story to recruit black sailors into the same segregated system that had limited him. And Miller did it. He showed up. He smiled. He represented the Navy with dignity and grace. Why? Maybe because he loved his country, despite how it treated him. Maybe because he hoped his example would eventually change things. Maybe because he didn't have a choice. Probably all three. Back to sea. After the war bond tour, Miller was assigned to the USS Indianapolis, serving as a mess attendant. Same job, same restrictions. The Indianapolis was a Portland-class heavy cruiser. She would later become famous for her own tragic fate, torpedoed by a Japanese submarine in 1945 with massive loss of life. But Miller wasn't aboard for that. He was transferred before the Indianapolis's final mission. In May 1943, he was assigned to the USS Liscome Bay, a Casablanca-class escort carrier. The Liscome Bay was new, commissioned in April 1943. She was smaller than fleet carriers, designed to support amphibious operations and provide air cover for convoys. Miller was still a mess attendant first class, still cooking, still serving, still waiting for the Navy to acknowledge that he deserved better. The acknowledgement never came. By November 1943, the war in the Pacific was shifting. The United States was starting to push back, island by island, atoll by atoll. The strategy was clear: move toward Japan, taking back territory, establishing air bases, choking off Japanese supply lines. The Gilbert Islands were next, specifically Tarawa and Makin atolls. The plan was a massive amphibious assault. Marines would hit the beaches. Naval forces would provide bombardment and air support. It was going to be brutal. The Japanese were dug in and ready. The Liscome Bay was part of Task Group 52.3, providing air cover for the assault on Makin Atoll. She carried 28 aircraft, fighters, and torpedo bombers. Her job was to keep Japanese aircraft away from the landing forces and support the Marines on the ground. The invasion kicked off on November 20, 1943. The fighting was ferocious. The Marines were taking heavy casualties, but they were advancing, taking ground, doing what Marines do. The Liscome Bay's aircraft flew mission after mission: combat air patrol, ground support, anti-submarine patrol. The crew was at battle stations for days, little sleep, constant stress. This was war. Doris Miller was below decks, in the galley or the mess areas, making sure the crew was fed, hot coffee, meals. The things that keep sailors functioning when everything else is chaos. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't what he'd proven he could do at Pearl Harbor. But it was necessary. And Miller did it. He'd been doing it for 4 years now. 4 years since Pearl Harbor. 4 years of being a hero in name while being a cook in practice. On the night of November 23rd, the Liscome Bay was operating off Butaratari, the main island of Makan Atoll. The operation was going well. The Marines had secured the island. The Navy was preparing to move on to the next objective. Doris Miller probably got a few hours of sleep, maybe wrote a letter home, if he had time, if he wasn't too tired. He was 24 years old, still young, still strong, still proud to serve, despite everything. He went to sleep not knowing he had hours left to live. 05:10 hours. The torpedo, November 24th, 1943. 5:10 in the morning, before dawn. The Liscome Bay is steaming in a predictable pattern, providing air operations support. Most of the crew is still asleep or just waking up. The ship is at a reduced state of readiness. Nobody's expecting trouble this close to a secured island. The Japanese submarine I-175, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Sunao Tabata, has been stalking Task Group 52-3 for hours. Tabata is patient, skilled. He's waited for the perfect shot. At 05:10, he fires a spread of torpedoes. One of them, a Type 95 torpedo, 23 feet long, carrying 893 pounds of high explosive, hits the Liscome Bay in the stern, right near the aft aircraft bomb magazine. What happens next happens in seconds. The torpedo detonates. The explosion is massive on its own, nearly a ton of high explosive punching into the ship's hull. Fuel oil ignites. Aviation gasoline erupts. But that's nothing compared to what comes next. The bomb magazine goes up. The Liscome Bay is carrying bombs and torpedoes for her aircraft, tons of ordnance, all of it stored in magazines designed to contain explosions, but a direct torpedo hit overwhelms those safety features. The magazine detonates. The explosion is so massive, it lifts the entire stern of the carrier out of the water. A mushroom cloud rises hundreds of feet into the air. Men on other ships in the task group see the flash and feel the shockwave. The sound is heard for miles. The Liscome Bay's stern is obliterated, just gone. The ship breaks in half. Fire is everywhere. Aviation fuel spreading across the water, igniting. Men are thrown into the air. Some are killed instantly by the blast. Some are blown overboard. Some are trapped in compartments that are flooding or burning. Doris Miller is somewhere in that hell. 23 minutes. The Liscome Bay sinks in 23 minutes. That's how long it takes for a 10,000-ton warship to go from fully operational to the bottom of the Pacific. 23 minutes of chaos, screaming, men trying to get topside, men jumping into burning water, men trapped below decks, pounding on hatches that won't open, feeling the water rise. We don't know exactly where Miller was when the torpedo hit. Below decks, probably, in the galley or nearby. When the explosion happened, he might have been thrown across the compartment, might have been injured immediately, or might have been lucky enough to be clear of the initial blast. Did he try to help other sailors? Almost certainly. That's who he was. At Pearl Harbor, he'd stayed to help his captain. He'd fought fires. He'd rescued men. He wouldn't change now. Did he make it topside? We don't know. Some men did. They jumped into the water and swam away from the sinking ship, away from the burning fuel. Some were picked up by destroyers that rushed to help. 272 men survived the Liscome Bay. 644 did not. Doris Miller was among the dead. His body was never recovered. He's listed as lost at sea. Somewhere in the waters off Makan Atoll, the cook who became a hero at Pearl Harbor went down with his ship. He was 24 years old. He'd served in the Navy for 4 years and 2 months. He'd received the Navy Cross, the Purple Heart, the American Defense Service Medal, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, and the World War II Victory Medal. He died as mess attendant first class. The Navy he'd served with distinction, the Navy he'd proven wrong, the Navy that had used his image while denying him opportunity, that Navy lost him in the dark waters of the Pacific. And America moved on. The silence after death. When Doris Miller died, the Navy sent a telegram to his mother. Henrietta Miller received the news that her son was missing in action, presumed dead. Later, the status would be changed to killed in action. She'd already lost one son. Connery Miller Jr. had died earlier in the war. Now Dory was gone too. The Navy sent condolences, official, formal, the kind of letters they sent to thousands of families during the war. But there was no special recognition of who Doris Miller had been. No acknowledgement that this wasn't just another casualty. This was the hero of Pearl Harbor, the most famous black sailor in the Navy. In black communities, Miller's death was mourned. The newspapers that had celebrated him in 1942 now wrote his obituary. The Pittsburgh Courier, the Chicago Defender. They remembered what he'd done. They honored his sacrifice. The mainstream press, much quieter. Some papers ran a few paragraphs. Many didn't mention it at all. Miller was buried, figuratively, twice, once in the Pacific, once in the national memory. The long wait for recognition. Let me walk you through the timeline of how long it took for America to properly honor Doris Miller. 1942, Navy Cross presented. This is good, but not enough. 1943, Miller dies. No special recognition beyond standard casualty notifications. 1944-1972, nearly 3 decades of silence. Miller is occasionally mentioned in articles about Pearl Harbor, usually as a footnote. The Navy doesn't make any special effort to keep his memory alive. He's not in textbooks. Most Americans forget he existed. 1973, the Navy commissions USS Miller, FF 1091, a Knox-class frigate. This is significant, the first ship named for a black sailor. But it takes 30 years after his death and 32 years after Pearl Harbor. The ship serves until 1991, then is decommissioned and sold to another Navy. 1991, 50 years after Pearl Harbor, Miller's hometown of Waco, Texas, finally dedicates a proper memorial. Half a century. That's how long it took for his own community to give him a lasting monument. 1990s, 2010s. Calls for the Medal of Honor begin in earnest. Petitions are launched. Historians write articles. Congressional representatives introduce bills. The argument is simple. Miller's actions at Pearl Harbor meet every criterion for the Medal of Honor. The Navy Cross was inadequate. The recognition should be upgraded. The Navy reviews it multiple times. They conclude that while Miller's actions were heroic, the Navy Cross was appropriate. They don't upgrade the award. This is bureaucracy protecting bureaucracy. Admitting Miller deserved the Medal of Honor means admitting the Navy made a mistake in 1942. It means confronting the racism that influenced the original decision. 2010, the Navy announces that the second ship in the Zumwalt-class destroyer line will be named USS Michael Monsoor. Good. Monsoor was a Medal of Honor recipient who deserves recognition. But people point out, why not name one for Doris Miller? He's still waiting for a modern ship worthy of his legacy. 2020, finally, the Navy announces that a Gerald R. Ford-class aircraft carrier will be named USS Doris Miller, CVN-81. This is massive. Ford-class carriers are the most advanced, most powerful warships ever built. They're nuclear-powered supercarriers that will serve for 50-plus years. Naming one for Miller is a huge honor. It's also 79 years after Pearl Harbor. Let that number sit with you. 79 years. The USS Doris Miller hasn't been built yet, as of 2024. It's in the planning stages. Construction will take years. By the time the carrier is commissioned, it will be approaching a century since Miller's heroic actions. The Medal of Honor. Push continues. As recently as 2021-2024, there are renewed efforts to posthumously award Miller the Medal of Honor. Petitions with hundreds of thousands of signatures, bills introduced in Congress, support from historians, civil rights organizations, military veterans. The arguments are straightforward. Miller's actions meet the criteria. Extraordinary heroism? Check. Risk of life beyond the call of duty? Check. Decisive impact on the battle? Check. The Navy Cross citation itself describes Medal of Honor level actions. Other recipients from Pearl Harbor received the Medal of Honor for comparable or lesser actions. The only logical explanation for Miller receiving the Navy Cross instead of the Medal of Honor is racism. And yet, as of now, the Medal of Honor hasn't been awarded. The Navy's position is that they can't retroactively change awards without new evidence or documentation. The Navy Cross was the decision made at the time, and they're standing by it. This is cowardice dressed up as procedure. What survivors said. Over the years, survivors of Pearl Harbor who witnessed Miller's actions have spoken out. Let me share some of their testimonies. Lieutenant Commander Dwar C. Johnson, who gave Miller the order to man the gun. I saw Miller grab hold of the machine gun. I saw him firing it. I saw the way he was operating it. He had no training. He wasn't supposed to be there, but he performed as well as any gunner I've ever seen. Ensign Victor Delano, who was on the bridge. Miller was remarkable. The ship was sinking, the captain was dying, aircraft were attacking, and this young man just stepped up and did what needed to be done. I don't know where he found the courage or the skill, but he had both. Other sailors from the West Virginia interviewed over the years. Dory was strong. He was always calm. He never complained about the way he was treated. He just did his job. He was better than how they treated him. These men, white men mostly, saw what Miller did. They knew he deserved better than what he got. Some of them spoke up at the time. Some spoke up decades later. All of them confirmed the same thing. Doris Miller was a hero, and the Navy didn't fully honor him. His family's fight. Henrietta Miller lived until 1959. She died 18 years after her son, never seeing him get the full recognition he deserved. She kept his medals. She kept his memory alive. She told anyone who would listen about what her boy had done. But she died before the first ship was named for him. Died before Waco built his memorial. Died knowing the world had started to forget. Other family members kept fighting, kept pushing for recognition, kept Dory's story alive in their community. It shouldn't have been their job. The Navy should have done it. The nation should have done it. But that's how it works, isn't it? The people who are wronged have to fight for justice, while the institutions that wrong them wait for everyone to forget. The door he kicked open. Doris Miller didn't live to see integration in the military. He died in 1943. Executive Order 9981, which desegregated the armed forces, wasn't issued until 1948. Full implementation took even longer, into the 1950s for the Navy. But his story was used as a weapon in that fight. Civil rights organizations pointed to Miller as proof. Look what black men can do when you give them a chance. Look at the heroism. Look at the competence. Look at what you're wasting with segregation. The NAACP used Miller's example in their campaigns against military segregation. A. Philip Randolph, the labor leader and civil rights activist, cited Miller in his threats to organize mass protests if discrimination continued. The black press kept running stories about Miller, kept asking uncomfortable questions. If Doris Miller could man a gun at Pearl Harbor, why are black sailors still restricted? If he could fight with courage and skill, why does the Navy still consider black men inferior? These questions didn't have good answers. The Navy knew it. Everyone knew it. Military necessity helped too. World War II required massive manpower. You can't fight a global war while artificially restricting 13 million potential service members based on skin color. The military needed bodies, needed sailors, needed soldiers. So they started opening doors. 1942, the Navy begins accepting black sailors for general service ratings beyond the Messman branch. Not combat roles yet, but progress. 1944, the Golden 13 become the first black commissioned officers in the Navy. January 1944. They're trained at Great Lakes Naval Training Station. They commission as ensigns. It's a huge breakthrough. The Navy had never commissioned black officers before. Who were these men commissioned in the shadow of? Doris Miller. His example was explicit in the push to train black officers. If an enlisted man could do what Miller did, imagine what trained black officers could accomplish. 1948. President Truman issues Executive Order 9981. It is hereby declared to be the policy of the President that there shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin. The military fought it, dragged their feet, made excuses. But the order was clear. Integration was coming. 1950s. Slow, grudging implementation. Ships integrate. Units integrate. The Navy stops having separate berthing areas for black sailors. Stops restricting ratings by race. Becomes, officially at least, colorblind in its assignments. It wasn't fast. It wasn't smooth. Racism didn't disappear just because an order said it should. Black sailors still faced discrimination, still had to work twice as hard for half the recognition, still dealt with bigoted officers and resentful white sailors. But the system changed. The official policy changed. And it changed in part because Doris Miller had proven that the old policy was based on lies. The legacy in numbers. Let me show you what Doris Miller's sacrifice helped create. Today, approximately 19% of the U.S. Navy is black, roughly proportional to the U.S. population. The Navy has had black admirals since 1971, when Samuel Gravely became the first. There are black officers at every rank. Black sailors serve in every rating: pilots, nuclear engineers, SEALs, submariners. Every job is open. The Naval Academy has been integrated since 1949. Black midshipmen graduate and commission alongside everyone else. None of this was inevitable. It was fought for. Doris Miller was one of the fighters, whether he meant to be or not. The monuments. Let's talk about how Miller is remembered today. Doris Miller Memorial, dedicated in Waco, Texas, in 1991. A statue of Miller at a machine gun. It's the first memorial to a black hero of World War II in Texas. It took 50 years, but Waco finally honored its son. USS Miller, FF 1091, served from 1973 to 1991, named in his honor. The first ship named for a black sailor. Miller Hall, named at Naval Station Pearl Harbor, a building bearing his name at the place where he became a hero. USS Doris Miller, CVN 81, the future aircraft carrier. When it's commissioned, probably in the 2030s, it will be the most powerful warship in the world. Named for a cook from Waco, numerous schools, parks, and community centers, especially in black communities, Miller's name lives on in institutions dedicated to education and service. The Navy's own materials. Today, the Navy proudly claims Miller as one of their heroes. Training materials mention him. Recruitment materials feature him. The official Navy history of Pearl Harbor gives him prominence. It's fitting. It's deserved. It's also deeply ironic given how the Navy treated him while he was alive. Miller has appeared in books, documentaries, and films about Pearl Harbor. The 2001 film Pearl Harbor includes a depiction of Miller's actions, though condensed and fictionalized. Numerous documentaries about Pearl Harbor feature Miller's story. Historical books about World War II and black military history prominently feature his example. He's no longer a footnote. He's not forgotten. The story survived. But ask yourself, how many Americans know his name? How many high school students learn about him in history class? How many people could tell you what he did at Pearl Harbor? The answer is not enough. Even now, 83 years later, Doris Miller's story isn't as widely known as it should be. That's why we're here. That's why this story needs to be told again and again. What Doris Miller proved. Let's be explicit about what Miller demonstrated on December 7, 1941. First, competence doesn't require permission. Miller never received permission to be a warrior. The Navy explicitly denied it to him. But when the moment came, he didn't wait for authorization. He didn't ask if he was allowed. He saw what needed to be done, and he did it. How many people are waiting for permission to be great? How many are held back, not by lack of ability, but by systems that tell them they're not allowed to try? Miller said, "Watch me anyway." Second, courage doesn't check credentials. The Navy said black men would panic under fire, that they lacked the emotional discipline for combat, that they couldn't be trusted in crisis. Miller was under fire from attacking aircraft while his ship sank and his captain died. He didn't panic. He fought. He saved lives. He performed with exactly the courage and discipline the Navy said he lacked. Training helps. Experience helps. But courage, real courage, comes from character. And the character doesn't have a color. Third, systems that limit people based on identity are weak. The Navy's racial policy wasn't just immoral, it was strategically stupid. They were artificially limiting their talent pool. They were restricting capable men. They were weakening their own force based on pseudoscience and prejudice. Doris Miller was proof that the Navy was wasting talent. How many other black sailors could have been gunners, pilots, officers? How many were forced to cook when they could have fought? How much capability did the Navy throw away because of racism? This lesson applies beyond the military. Every organization that restricts people based on race, gender, religion, or any identity category is weakening itself. You're not just being unfair, you're being ineffective. Fourth, recognition delayed is justice denied. Miller deserved the Medal of Honor in 1942. He deserved a commission. He deserved the chance to be everything he proved he could be. He got a medal and then went back to being a cook. He died at 24 with his potential unfulfilled. Naming a carrier for him 79 years later is good. but it doesn't make up for the opportunities he was denied, the life he could have lived, the example he could have set if the Navy had actually changed its policies after his heroism. We can't bring Miller back. We can't give him those lost years. But we can learn the lesson. When someone proves themselves, honor them immediately. Don't wait for it to be convenient. Don't wait for the politics to line up. Do right by people while they're alive to see it. Fifth, individual heroism can challenge systemic injustice. Miller didn't set out to be a civil rights pioneer. He just wanted to serve his country, but his actions became ammunition in the fight against segregation. One man, 15 minutes, one gun, and the entire doctrine of racial inferiority took a hit it never recovered from. That's the power of individual action. You don't have to be a movement leader. You don't have to be an activist with a plan. Sometimes you just have to do the right thing when the moment comes and let history take care of the rest. Miller's example helped desegregate the military. That helped pave the way for the broader civil rights movement. That helped change America. From a machine gun on a sinking ship to the integration of the armed forces to the broader transformation of American society, the chain is clear. Let me connect the dots explicitly. The military integrated before the rest of America. Schools, buses, lunch counters. Those fights came later, but the military led the way, starting in 1948. Why? Because World War II had proven that racial segregation weakened the force. Examples like Doris Miller, the Tuskegee Airmen, the 761st Tank Battalion, the 92nd Infantry Division, black service members had proven themselves in combat. The old excuses didn't work anymore. When the military integrated, it created the first major institution in American life where black and white people worked together on equal terms, lived together, took orders from each other, succeeded or failed together. That experience changed minds. White soldiers who served alongside black soldiers learned that the stereotypes were lies. They went home with different views. They raised children with different values. Black service members got training, education, opportunities. They used the GI Bill to go to college. They became leaders in their communities. They joined the civil rights movement with organizational skills learned in the military. The integrated military became proof that integration could work, that black and white Americans could cooperate, that the fears and excuses were garbage. And it all traces back, in part, to men like Doris Miller, who forced the issue by their example. November 24, 1943. The final moments. Let me take you back to the Liscome Bay one more time, not to wallow in tragedy, but because this moment matters. 5:10 a.m. The torpedo hits. The bomb magazine explodes. The ship is dying. Somewhere in that chaos is Doris Miller, 24 years old, 4 years in the Navy, holder of the Navy Cross, hero of Pearl Harbor, still a cook. We don't know his exact last moments, but we can imagine them based on who he was. He probably tried to help. That's what he did at Pearl Harbor, stayed with his dying captain, fought fires, rescued men. He wouldn't change now, even as his own ship went down. Maybe he helped sailors get topside, used his strength to move debris, to pry open jammed hatches, to pull men through flooded compartments. Maybe he made it to the deck and saw the burning water below, knew he had to jump, knew the odds of survival were terrible, but you had to try. Maybe he went into that burning water and swam, used that boxer's strength, tried to stay ahead of the spreading flames, tried to reach safety, or maybe he never made it topside. Maybe the compartment flooded too fast. Maybe he was trapped below with hundreds of other sailors, feeling the ship tilt and break and sink. We don't know. His body was never found. What we know is this: Doris Miller died serving a nation that never fully served him back. He wore the uniform of a military that considered him inferior. He fought for a country that wouldn't let him drink from the same water fountains as the men he saved. He gave everything, his youth, his potential, his life, and got back a fraction of what he deserved. And he did it anyway. The unfairness of it all. Let's sit with the injustice for a moment. Doris Miller deserved to survive Pearl Harbor and go home to Waco as a hero. Deserved to walk down the streets of his hometown with his Navy Cross and see the pride in his mother's eyes. Deserved to use the GI Bill to go to college, to build a life, to raise a family. He deserved to see the Navy integrate, to see black sailors serve in every rating, to see the system he'd proven wrong finally admit it. He deserved to watch the civil rights movement succeed, to see the Voting Rights Act pass, to see the country he'd defended become a little more just. He deserved to be old, to tell his story himself on documentaries and in classrooms, to stand on the deck of a ship bearing his name and know that his sacrifice meant something. He deserved the Medal of Honor. Not 80 years later, not posthumously with bureaucratic reluctance, immediately, while he was alive to receive it from the President himself. He got none of that. What he got was 23 minutes in freezing water before the Pacific took him. What he got was 4 years of service and a grave that doesn't exist. That's not fair. That's not right. And we can't fix it because he's gone. But we can make sure the lesson isn't lost. For 50 years, Doris Miller's story was mostly forgotten outside black communities. It wasn't in the textbooks. It wasn't in the mainstream narrative of Pearl Harbor. Most Americans didn't know it happened. That silence was a choice. The choice to emphasize some stories and bury others. The choice to keep certain truths uncomfortable and complicated out of the comfortable, simple narrative. But Miller's story survived because people fought to keep it alive. The black press, civil rights organizations, historians who cared about truth more than comfort. People like you, listening right now, who will share this story and make sure it doesn't die. Every time we tell this story, we're making a choice. We're saying, this matters. This person mattered. This injustice won't be forgotten. This example will inspire. Doris Miller was 24 years old when he died. He served 4 years. He received the Navy Cross, the Purple Heart, and other campaign medals. He became one of the most famous black Americans of his era. And he never got promoted beyond cooking. That's not a contradiction. That's the truth of America in 1943. That's the gap between the values we claim to hold and the reality of how we behaved. But Miller's example, his refusal to be limited by other people's expectations, his courage in the face of both the enemy and systemic injustice, his grace under circumstances that would justify bitterness, that example survived. Every black admiral in the Navy today stands on Doris Miller's shoulders. Every integrated unit, every equal opportunity, every barrier broken, every person who was told they couldn't and did anyway. It all traces back to a cook from Waco who decided that when his country needed defending, he'd defend it, permission or not, training or not, recognition or not. That's heroism in its purest form. That's patriotism defined not by flags and slogans, but by sacrifice and action. That's Doris Miller. So here's what I need you to do. First, share this story. Don't let it be forgotten again. Tell someone who doesn't know. post it, talk about it. Make sure Doris Miller's name lives on. Second, demand the Medal of Honor. There are active petitions, congressional representatives who can be contacted. The Navy needs to hear that this injustice hasn't been forgotten. Miller earned that medal. Give it to him. Third, support the USS Doris Miller. When that carrier is commissioned, it should be with all the ceremony and honor it deserves. That ship should sail with every sailor aboard, knowing whose name they carry and why it matters. Fourth, challenge the narratives. When you hear the story of Pearl Harbor told without mentioning Miller, correct it. When textbooks leave him out, demand better. When people claim racism wasn't that bad, tell them about the cook who became a hero and then went back to being a cook. Fifth, drop your location in the comments one more time. Let's see how far this story has traveled. Let's build a community of people who know the truth and won't let it die. Sixth, like this video, subscribe to this channel, because if they hid Doris Miller's story for 50 years, what else are we missing? What other heroes are buried in footnotes? What other truths are we not being told? I'm going to find them. I'm going to tell them. And I need you with me. Doris Miller, Mess Attendant First Class, Navy Cross recipient, Pearl Harbor hero. The man who proved the system wrong in 15 minutes and spent the rest of his short life reminding us that courage doesn't ask for permission. The man who fought 2 wars simultaneously, one against the Japanese Empire, one against American racism, and made progress in both. The man who deserved better from his country and gave everything anyway. The man who died at 24, but whose example will live forever if we keep telling his story. Remember his name, honor his sacrifice, demand his proper recognition, and never, ever forget. The measure of a hero isn't in the medals they wear. It's in the doors they kick open, the lies they shatter, the example they set. Doris Miller kicked open doors, shattered lies, set an example. The rest is up to us.